Rachael Ray seemed to have it all: a thriving career, millions of fans, and a marriage that looked picture-perfect to the world. But in 2024, everything changed in an instant. Her husband made a shocking announcement that left fans heartbroken and asking questions nobody expected to hear. What followed was a deeply personal journey that revealed something profound about love, loss, and holding on when everything falls apart. Rachael Ray wasn't just a cooking show host. She was an empire. For over 2 decades, she had built something extraordinary, a career that started with a simple Food Network show and somehow became a household name. Millions of people watched her cook dinner in 30 minutes. Millions more bought her products, read her magazine, followed her life. To the world, she had cracked the code of success that most people only dream about. But behind every perfect image is a human story. Rachael married John Cusimano in 2010, a music producer and restaurateur who stayed quietly out of the spotlight while his wife dominated it. For years, they seemed genuinely happy. They adopted a daughter. They built a life together. They posed for photos at charity events and red carpets, always smiling, always together. The narrative was clear: she had the career, he had the heart, and somehow it all worked. What most people didn't know was the constant pressure. The grueling schedule. The early mornings and late nights. The weight of being recognized everywhere, of having your life dissected by strangers online. Rachael rarely talked about the toll it took. She was the energetic, optimistic personality on camera, the woman who made cooking look effortless and living look like a party. But real life doesn't work like a 30-minute episode. In 2023, Rachael Ray experienced something that changed her perspective entirely. She suffered a serious bout with Lyme disease, a tick-borne illness that left her struggling with fatigue, pain, and a body that wouldn't cooperate the way it used to. It was quiet at first. Few people noticed. She kept working, kept showing up, kept smiling. But internally, something shifted. She was reminded of something important: time is not infinite. Health is not guaranteed. Yet even as she dealt with this, nobody expected what came next. Mini cliffhanger, but in 2024, her husband would make a statement that suggested something far more serious was happening behind closed doors. In early 2024, Rachael Ray was diagnosed with Lyme disease, but this time it was different. This wasn't just fatigue or occasional pain. The disease had progressed, affecting her health in ways that forced her to confront a reality she had been running from for years. The woman who had built her entire brand on energy, optimism, and doing everything at full speed suddenly had to consider the possibility that she might not be able to keep up anymore. What made this moment even harder was the timing. Rachael Ray had just launched new projects. She had commitments. She had a reputation for being reliable, for showing up, for delivering. The thought of slowing down wasn't just inconvenient, it felt like losing part of her identity. For someone who had defined herself through constant motion and productivity, stillness felt like surrender. John Cusimano watched this unfold. He saw his wife struggling in ways she had never struggled before. He saw her fighting against her own body, refusing to accept limitations, pushing through pain because that's what she had always done. And he realized something that many people in similar situations come to understand: sometimes love means stepping back so someone else can step forward. The diagnosis forced conversations they may not have had otherwise. What did health mean now? What mattered most? If Rachael couldn't work at the pace she used to, what would their life look like? These weren't simple questions with easy answers. These were the kind of questions that test a marriage, that force couples to decide whether they're truly committed or just committed to an idea. Medical professionals advised rest and recovery. But Rachael's instinct was to fight, to push, to prove that Lyme disease wouldn't define her. She had spent her entire life defying limitations. Why should this be any different? Yet her body was sending a different message. And John was listening to what his wife couldn't hear herself. What happened next would require a decision that neither of them saw coming. Mini cliffhanger, but before Rachael could fully process her diagnosis, John made a public statement that suggested he had made a choice about their future. In the spring of 2024, John Cusimano did something unexpected. He stepped into the public conversation about his wife's health in a way he never had before. For years, he had been content to stay in the background, the supportive spouse who let his wife shine. But this moment was different. He spoke openly about what Rachael was facing, and in doing so, he revealed something deeply human: the struggle of watching someone you love fight a battle they might not win. His statement wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a tearful confession or a viral moment designed for engagement. Instead, it was measured, honest, and heartbreaking in its simplicity. He acknowledged that Lyme disease had fundamentally changed their lives. He talked about the difficulty of watching someone suffer. And most importantly, he made it clear that he was choosing to be present for whatever came next, not as the man in the background, but as an active participant in her recovery and their future together. What people didn't fully understand at first was what this really meant. John wasn't just supporting his wife through an illness. He was publicly redefining what their marriage was about. For years, the narrative had been Rachael Ray's story, her success, her career, her brand. John had been content with that arrangement. But illness has a way of shifting priorities. Suddenly, career didn't matter as much as presence. Success didn't matter as much as health. And the public image they had carefully constructed didn't matter as much as the private reality of two people trying to navigate something terrifying. There were reports that Rachael had stepped back from some of her commitments. She was being more selective about projects. She was prioritizing her health in ways she never had before. And John was making it clear that he would support whatever decisions she made, even if those decisions meant less work, less visibility, less of the constant grind that had defined their lives. But this choice came with complications. Rachael's identity was so deeply tied to her work that stepping back felt like losing herself. And John's commitment to support her unconditionally was tested by the reality of watching someone struggle with chronic illness, a battle that doesn't have a clear endpoint or guaranteed victory. The real story wasn't about a diagnosis. It was about what two people chose to do when everything changed. Mini cliffhanger, yet what happened next revealed just how deep their commitment to each other really went. The public didn't know the full extent of what Rachael Ray was experiencing. Social media was filled with speculation. Some people questioned whether her illness was real. Others debated whether she was being dramatic. A few even suggested she was using it as an excuse to step back from work. But those closest to her understood something different entirely. Lyme disease doesn't care about your career. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care that you have millions of fans depending on you. What shocked people most was how Rachael responded. Instead of disappearing, instead of playing the victim, she became transparent in a way she had never been before. She shared details about her symptoms, about the exhaustion, about the neurological effects of the disease. She talked about brain fog, about pain that wouldn't go away, about days when getting out of bed felt impossible. For a woman who had built her brand on positivity and energy, this vulnerability was almost unthinkable. And John stood beside her through every revelation. He didn't try to minimize her experience. He didn't suggest she was overreacting. Instead, he validated it publicly, which was its own form of courage. In a culture that often dismisses chronic illness, that pushes people to push through, John was essentially saying, "My wife's health matters more than her career. My wife's well-being matters more than our public image." The response from fans was mixed but ultimately moving. Many people who had suffered from Lyme disease reached out, sharing their own stories. People who had watched Rachael for years said they had a new appreciation for her. And perhaps most importantly, people going through similar situations with their own spouses felt less alone. Rachael and John had accidentally created a conversation about something that millions of people deal with but few talk about openly. Behind the scenes, their life changed dramatically. Rachael became more selective about appearances. She focused on projects she could do on her own timeline. She rested when she needed to rest. And John became not just a husband, but an advocate, someone willing to challenge the narrative that success means constant productivity, that value is measured by output. But there was something else happening too. Something that would take time to fully understand. Mini cliffhanger, what emerged from this crisis was a love story that looked nothing like the one people thought they knew. Every marriage has a breaking point. The moment when you discover whether you're truly committed or just comfortable. For Rachael and John, that moment came when illness forced them to strip away everything superficial and ask the hard questions. Who are we without the career? Who are we without the image? Who are we when one person can't carry the weight anymore? What they discovered was unexpected. John had spent years supporting Rachael's career from the sidelines, but he had never been truly needed in the way he was now. There's a difference between being a supportive spouse and being essential. Suddenly, he was essential. He wasn't just attending events with her, he was managing her schedule to protect her energy. He wasn't just being present, he was advocating for her health when she was too tired to advocate for herself. He became her voice when her own voice was exhausted. For Rachael, accepting help was perhaps harder than facing the disease itself. She had built an empire on independence, on being the one who took care of others, who solved problems, who made things happen. Accepting that she needed help, that she couldn't do it all alone, was a kind of death to the person she thought she was. But it was also a resurrection. Because in accepting help, she discovered something profound. She wasn't defined by her productivity. She was defined by her relationships, by her character, by her capacity to love and be loved. Their marriage transformed. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in the quiet, steady way that real transformation happens. They spent more time together. They had conversations they had been too busy to have before. They laughed. They cried. They faced mortality in a way that most people avoid until it's forced upon them. And through it all, John made a choice every single day, to stay, to support, to love, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Friends who knew them noticed the change. The relationship seemed deeper somehow. More authentic. Less about maintaining an image and more about maintaining each other. John gave interviews where he talked about the importance of showing up for the people you love. Rachael spoke about how illness had taught her to slow down, to appreciate small moments, to let go of the need to be everything to everyone. But perhaps most importantly, they became advocates for something rarely discussed, the role of partners in chronic illness. How spouses sacrifice. How caregiving can be an expression of love. How sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit that you can't do it alone. Mini cliffhanger, yet their story was far from over. In fact, what they built from this crisis would inspire far more people than either of them expected. Every marriage has a breaking point. The moment when you discover whether you're truly committed or just comfortable. For Rachael and John, that moment came when illness forced them to strip away everything superficial and ask the hard questions. Who are we without the career? Who are we without the image? Who are we when one person can't carry the weight anymore? What they discovered was unexpected. John had spent years supporting Rachael's career from the sidelines, but he had never been truly needed in the way he was now. There's a difference between being a supportive spouse and being essential. Suddenly, he was essential. He wasn't just attending events with her, he was managing her schedule to protect her energy. He wasn't just being present, he was advocating for her health when she was too tired to advocate for herself. He became her voice when her own voice was exhausted. For Rachael, accepting help was perhaps harder than facing the disease itself. She had built an empire on independence, on being the one who took care of others, who solved problems, who made things happen. Accepting that she needed help, that she couldn't do it all alone, was a kind of death to the person she thought she was. But it was also a resurrection. Because in accepting help, she discovered something profound. She wasn't defined by her productivity. She was defined by her relationships, by her character, by her capacity to love and be loved. Their marriage transformed. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in the quiet, steady way that real transformation happens. They spent more time together. They had conversations they had been too busy to have before. They laughed. They cried. They faced mortality in a way that most people avoid until it's forced upon them. And through it all, John made a choice every single day, to stay, to support, to love, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Friends who knew them noticed the change. The relationship seemed deeper somehow. More authentic. Less about maintaining an image and more about maintaining each other. John gave interviews where he talked about the importance of showing up for the people you love. Rachael spoke about how illness had taught her to slow down, to appreciate small moments, to let go of the need to be everything to everyone. But perhaps most importantly, they became advocates for something rarely discussed, the role of partners in chronic illness. How spouses sacrifice. How caregiving can be an expression of love. How sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit that you can't do it alone. Mini cliffhanger, yet their story was far from over. In fact, what they built from this crisis would inspire far more people than either of them expected. By late 2024, something remarkable had happened. Rachael Ray and John Cusimano had transformed a personal tragedy into something meaningful. They weren't hiding from the reality of chronic illness, they were speaking about it openly, helping others navigate the same journey. Rachael continued working, but on her terms now. She was selective. She was intentional. She was healthy in ways she hadn't been in years, not because the disease had gone away, but because she had stopped fighting against her own limitations. John's role evolved too. He wasn't just the supportive spouse anymore. He became a voice for caregivers, for the people who stand behind someone fighting a chronic illness. He talked about the emotional toll, the exhaustion, the weight of watching someone suffer. But he also talked about the privilege of being needed, of having the opportunity to show up in that way. His willingness to be vulnerable broke down barriers that kept many people silent about their own struggles. What made their story resonate so deeply was its ordinariness. This wasn't a celebrity tragedy that ended in separation or resentment. It was a marriage that got stronger through adversity. It was a couple that chose each other, not just on the good days, but on the hard days. It was a reminder that love isn't just the romantic moments, it's the unglamorous, daily choice to show up, even when it's difficult. Rachael Ray's brand had always been about making life easier, about finding shortcuts and solutions. But her real lesson came from accepting that some things can't be rushed or solved. Some things just require presence. They require patience. They require love shown through actions, not words. And John Cusimano, the The man who had been content to stay in the background for years, became the hero of a story that had nothing to do with fame or success. Now here's what I want you to think about. In your own life, in your own relationships, have you ever had someone show up for you the way John showed up for Rachael? Not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. With the willingness to be there when things got hard. Because if you have, you understand something that most people overlook: that's real love. That's the kind of love that changes lives. And if you're watching this and you've been that person for someone else, know that what you're doing matters. It matters more than you probably realize. Let me know in the comments, have you ever experienced that kind of love, or have you been that person for someone else? Their journey also sparked important conversations about workplace culture. If even someone as successful as Rachael Ray needed to step back and prioritize her health, what does that say about the pressure we all put on ourselves? What does it say about the culture that celebrates hustle above everything else? What would change if more people, famous or not, felt empowered to make the same choice? In the end, Rachael and John's story became bigger than either of them. It became a blueprint for how to love someone through crisis, how to redefine success when life changes unexpectedly, and how to find meaning in the most difficult moments. Their marriage didn't end when illness arrived. It transformed. And in that transformation, they discovered something that no amount of career success could ever provide: they discovered each other all over again. But here's what most people don't realize. This story of Rachael and John? It's not unique. Every single day, thousands of people face similar moments. Thousands of families are navigating chronic illness right now, making the same kinds of choices, discovering the same kinds of love. Many of you watching this video are going through something similar. And if you are, I want you to know that you're not alone. Your struggle matters. Your love matters. Your choice to show up, even when it's hard, matters more than you know. If stories like this, stories about real people, real struggles, and real love, are the kind of content that speaks to you, then I'm asking you to subscribe to this channel. Because what we do here is tell stories that matter. Stories that remind us what it means to be human. And the next video we're releasing? It's about another couple who faced something even more impossible. A situation where love had to overcome odds that seemed completely insurmountable. And the ending? Well, let's just say nobody saw it coming. You're going to want to watch it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Rachael and John's story. And thank you for caring about something real.